Thank you, everybody, for showing up here. Welcome to our special BeyondCorp meetup. And thank you again to Heavybit for graciously hosting this meetup. This is one of my favorite spaces in the city, and in fact, I used to work just over there for about 3 whole years. Surprisingly, they still let me in the building. But it's great to be here. We held the first kind of BeyondCorp meetup here just about a year ago, and I'd say about 3 or 4x the size of the community, which is great, which is kind of why we're all here. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ivan from ScaleFT. We are a software company here based in San Francisco, kind of working on the next generation of access management solutions. And we've just been really inspired by BeyondCorp, and just decided that, let's take the lead in kind of building a community around kind of promoting modern security architectures and kind of just getting people together to kind of share their own kind of real-world experiences. We have a incredible panel of experts here ready to talk about BeyondCorp. So with us today, starting here, is Mark Rogers, Head of Infrastructure Security at Cloudflare. That's his, fourth beer? Right here is Patrick Albert. Wow. Who brought a fan club, Security Engineering at AppDynamics. And Ryan Seekley here, who is Director of Infrastructure and Security at Quid. All right, thank you. I will be your moderator, and I would say that it's probably, it's in everyone's best interest for me to just kind of get out of the way and kind of let the experts speak.
Yeah.
You
don't want me to do that.
All right, but I do want to set the stage before I let you guys go off the rails. Just kind of want to share what I've been seeing across the industry, kind of running these BeyondCorp meetups and just kind of engaging with the community over the past year or so. So I would say the last year, 2017, was all about awareness. More people were just discovering the BeyondCorp papers, just kind of reading about it, kind of studying the architecture, kind of looking at the outcomes, and kind of saying, okay, this is pretty cool. And the headline from Google is pretty cool. We eliminated the use of VPNs for all of our employees. Check that off a box. And that's great. But 2018, so far, I would say moving from awareness to discovery. So the last few meetups we've ran in 2018, the conversation has shifted from, what is this BeyondCorp all about? It's more about, what does this mean for me? How can I apply this in my own company? Or I'm starting to work on a POC internally. I've got some questions about, what do I do about BYOD, or how do I manage access policies? So I think that just shows the progression of the community. And I think one of the things I want to do with a panel here is to really tease out some of your kind of real-world experiences. Because if BeyondCorp's going to be a thing, we kind of have to extract it from just being a Google internal project. We have to make it work for everybody else. And the best way to do that is to kind of share our own experiences and kind of help each other be successful together. So with that, I think I will kind of kick this thing off. I wanted everybody to just really quickly introduce yourself, maybe tell a little tidbit about what brought you to BeyondCorp and kind of what your first impressions were. Let's start with you, Ryan.
Yeah, sure. So first I want to say it's pretty impressive that everyone's excited enough to be about not having a VPN, that they show up to something like this, that's something that motivates people to be like, no VPN, all right. I work at Quid. Our company helps people get insight from lots of unstructured data. So you can think machine learning, NLP, all those buzzwords that everyone likes to throw around the valley. Blockchain, yeah, we probably throw blockchain in there too. Yep, exactly. So if you take a lot of text, we do all that magic on it, you get insights. We stumbled into BeyondCorp and kind of serendipitously, where we were doing a migration, and we didn't like managing a VPN very much, and we're small enough that we felt like, let's give it a shot.
Excellent. Patrick.
My turn. Patrick Albert, Director of Security Engineering at AppDynamics. How did I get here? I don't know. But
I thought we found you in the alley.
I'm pretty sure you did.
Yeah.
Where's my bottle? I think the thing that gets me excited about this is nobody likes VPNs, which is true, and no one likes building out legacy networks that backhaul traffic, inspect all the things, and don't allow for flexible usage of apps and services that we have. So I could say more, but this guy's way
quick
better.
little tidbit.
Yeah.
Off to you, Mark.
I'm Mark Rogers. I'm the Head of Information Security for Cloudflare. Most of you, I hope, know Cloudflare. About, I think, between 10 to 12% of all web traffic on the internet goes through us on a good day. So big responsibility, a lot of things to do to try and keep things secure. What I particularly like about the Google BeyondCorp approach is VPNs encourage an eggshell approach to security, and generally once you get beyond it, there's nothing, and you have unlimited access to everything inside. BeyondCorp, on the other hand, enables you to build real defense in depth, which means truly secure architectures.
Now, is there anything else kind of about BeyondCorp in terms of an outcome perspective that's maybe a little more nuanced, that you're super excited about or extra excited about?
Well, what I mentioned before about defense in depth means also much more granular control.
Yep.
So one of the challenges with security in a non-BeyondCorp world is security is awfully very binary. You give someone access, you don't give them access. BeyondCorp opens up a lot more possibilities of granular access, so you can have limited access to certain production systems to allow people to retrieve information, whereas normally you would have to give them full interactive shell access, which ultimately becomes a major security risk.
I think Mark kind of hit it on the head when he said it forces us to go defense in depth. And we're focusing now on the actual assets themselves and less on this perimeter that we've built, this eggshell, as you'd call it, right? This frail piece of junk that relies on either physical access or VPN access.
Right.
No longer can I walk into an office and plug in
Right.
and delete your database.
So actually, I've got a great analogy for this. There's this car that lots of people know about, which is mostly electric. Well, actually, it is entirely electric. And that car has a VPN, and that VPN is permanently connected back to the company that makes this car. If you compromise the security in that car, as allegedly I may or may not have done, you get you get complete and unrestricted access back to that company. And some of the things we found in there I'm not supposed to talk about, but the net result is there you have a typical eggshell security approach with satellite devices that are VPNing in. So externally it looks okay, but as soon as one of those endpoints gets compromised, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down.
What's the weather like in Mars then there, Mark?
Apparently the battery is already flat.
So you guys both mentioned defense in depth, and kind of traditionally you look at defense in depth was just kind of adding more to the perimeter. And then, but that wasn't really leading to a more secure outcome. I think Google kind of said defense in depth doesn't necessarily mean we just pad our perimeter over and over again. What is your view of defense in depth now in this kind of more, maybe layer 7 might be the right way to put it, or more of a BeyondCorp style kind of model? Ryan, you got any thoughts there?
Sure. I mean, to add what these guys were saying just a second ago, I think there's two things that get me pretty excited from somebody that isn't as in the security space yet. Is like, one, I feel like this is going about it more as a software approach, which is something that's software-defined networking, infrastructure as software. Like, it's nice to see this apply to something like VPNs, where like from the get-go, all the solutions going to come out are going to be a lot more developer-oriented, which helps people like me.
Right.
I think the other thing that's really appealing is not only do you have the resource like granularity, but now you can audit, at the resource granularity too, which is super helpful. Like it's getting harder to stop all our employees from doing all this random stuff. At least now we can know like specifically what they're getting at, rather than just having this one VPN that kind of like feeds into everything.
Yeah, actually, that's on display this week with the Uber Waymo trial. I think Google's like, we noticed you did all of these things because we have BeyondCorp in place and everything was audited and logged. Maybe you should not have stolen those documents, but I'm not a judge, so I'll let them figure that out. Cool. So yeah, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the outcomes, and one of the things that's interesting about BeyondCorp, and I think security in general, security has traditionally been seen as kind of a blocker. You guys are all in fast-moving organizations. We're moving in kind of modern cloud, DevOps organizations. Productivity now is starting to become a term in the context of security. Those two things have usually clashed. Where do you see the right balance between ensuring that you have the right security measures in place, but also making things more productive for your developers?
So I think historically, security has been the blocker, and it actually moved towards being an enabler probably almost 10 years ago, but the architecture didn't catch up. What Google BeyondCorp represents is the architecture finally catching up with the concept that security is there to help a business go faster. One of the analogies I like to use is, why do cars have brakes? And most people say to stop them. Well, actually, no. If you look at when cars first developed brakes, there was an exponential increase in the top speed because brakes gave people more control, which gave people more confidence and gave the ability to go faster.
I love that analogy. Yeah,
I'm
that's a
gonna
good
go
one.
with what Mark said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll third that.
What Mark said.
It's mostly about, again, delivering the control to the actual users,
Right.
and not being an inhibitor and being an enabler. For
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I mean, it's taken the architecture some time to catch up. But I think the past 10 years of kind of cloud growth, now we're at this point now where security, that might be the last domino to fall in this kind of transformative kind of era. But once it does, it's going to open up the kind of world of opportunity for everybody. So I guess we'll lead that into now companies that now look at BeyondCorp. They see the outcomes. They experience the pain points. The analogy we like to use at Scale of T a lot is if BeyondCorp and Google's implementation, specifically of BeyondCorp, is like Mount Everest, what's Basecamp? Like, what's the first thing we can do to get there in kind of an easier fashion?
Yeah, for us, we just looked at SSH access first. I thought that was the first easy thing to knock out. It made a ton of sense. There's no reason we need to manage the keys the way we're doing before, and putting something like BeyondCorp with something like Scale of T just naturally fit. It didn't interrupt any of the developers' flow. In fact, it made onboarding new people way easier. We could get that granular resource. So for our Basecamp, 100% was just let's at least modernize the way we're granting access to all these groups of servers.
Perfect.
I've got a twist on Basecamp. I think Basecamp's actually getting the visibility to be able to make those decisions. I think a lot of companies still struggle with endpoint management and actual granular access control as it sits.
Right.
Like, we're still working with basics here.
Right.
So just being able to see and know what's happening on your endpoints and on your networks and with your applications is Basecamp for me.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
The other thing I'd say is I don't think BeyondCorp is the summit. BeyondCorp gets you pretty close to the summit, but there is a ways to go, and BeyondCorp is an enabler that will allow you to extend your security and finally reach the summit.
Yeah.
What do you
what's
see
the summit?
as, I was about to say, what do you see past BeyondCorp? What would be like?
There's a couple dead bodies on the way.
Yeah.
You don't know how true that
Those are
is.
used as guides, though, Those help you get there.
Yeah, they are. They definitely are.
Here's Quid. They tried to summit too early.
So some of the things that are missing are there needs to be more, even more granular access than BeyondCorp provides as it currently stands. There needs to be the ability to do behavioral identification within BeyondCorp.
Yep.
And BeyondCorp gives you the tools to build a lot of that, but there's still pieces that need to be created, and some of which are probably going to be industry specific. DLP is another thing that could be built into the BeyondCorp world. So I think there's a lot of extra things that can go, and getting to BeyondCorp enables you to do that. With a traditional organization where you've got a scattered infrastructure, where you don't know the security of half of the things inside your infrastructure, you don't know what's been owned and what hasn't been owned, I don't think you've got any chance of trying to control any of that.
Yeah, I think you echo almost what our IT people sound like. I think it hits them even harder to some extent than it does someone like me, whereas we have a little more control because we were there in the ground.
Right.
And only developers are largely our customers from a infrastructure standpoint, but IT they have just all these people trying to do all these things, and they don't clear anything with anybody. They're just trying to get their jobs done, and you have this huge. You don't know if they're using Dropbox or Box or if that was approved by somebody or what the difference is and how. Yeah, I think some sort of behavioral analysis would be super interesting to limit that.
I mean, you touch UBA as a concept and as a product is something that's going to push us even further into this granular relationship with our users and our actual infrastructure.
Right. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said visibility. If that's Basecamp, that's also the thing that gets you to the summit, interestingly enough. But it's about responding to that information that you're collecting properly, and then just continuing to adjust. Right? Probably at first it's being very reactive to what you see. You your audit logs, you can kind of go back in time. But as that evolves and you kind of start to identify patterns, you can be more proactive. Maybe that's kind of that next phase.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue maybe visibility is kind of a Basecamp of sorts, and then what to do with all the thousands or millions of things that people are doing every day is probably another level.
Making decisions with that information.
Yeah. Well, that's the discovery phase. I think that's just kind of where we are naturally. I mean, just as a whole industry and community around BeyondCorp, past awareness, now discovery is all about visibility. It's all about understanding your own kind of environments, all the different things you got to manage. And I think, one of the challenges that companies face when they're not Google is things like BYOD or, all this stuff. Google's very strict about the things that, are everything's inventoried, managed by Google, makes it easier to deploy BeyondCorp. What do you see as ways to kind of solve that for kind of general organizations that have more things to kind of manage and worry about.
That was pretty loaded.
Sorry. Yeah.
Which part? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, inventory plays a key role here.
Yeah.
We just talked about UBA. Like, I think if you can get visibility into endpoints, like my thing is going hard on endpoints and kind of network access. Period. Like start there. Like understand your inventory, as you were just saying. That
Yeah, understanding the inventory, and then really like the way we treat it kind of at Scale Up T is we see all that as inputs into making a decision, but you just have to be able to get that information. But that's a challenge that IT departments struggle with today. If you start to actually factor that into decision making, that's another big challenge.
we have big data, ML, AI, man.
Blockchain. Just got to blockchain, man. Come on, if you're gonna do it. Blockchain bingo. Who had that one? Anyone? Yeah. Okay, so device management is one of the clear things that stands out to me as a challenge. Are there, let's say you're at your companies or your own kind of experiences or putting yourselves in other companies' shoes, what are the things you think people are going to run into that might be challenging?
So I think one of the other great things about BeyondCorp is if you look at the traditional security appliance market and the security tools market, it's incredibly expensive. And what that means is enterprises can typically afford a lot of fancy things. Middle tier companies can afford some, and small companies can't afford any. But it's the small companies that are getting popped on a regular basis. BeyondCorp actually provides a mechanism where you can relatively cheaply build a robust, secure architecture, including things like public and private cloud infrastructure, without breaking the bank.
Oddly, I think those small companies are actually the ones that are in the position to do this well.
Right.
Yep.
I think trying to turn everything around and go to a BeyondCorp model is really where the pain points are.
Yeah.
But like probably for Quid, in my last company, it was kind of like starting from the ground floor. How are we going to do this? How do we do it right?
Right.
Built that model in immediately made it much easier.
Yeah, I have two comments to add to that. One, I think he makes a really good point as far as like small companies are the one that tend to eat it most when it comes to paying for security, because I feel like this industry is kind of messed up in that regard, in that like in order to get the SSO or the SAML or the more secure option, the enterprise call us, and you think like we're going to be able to do that for all these things. There's no way. So then we don't get that security, and that's such a shame and so frustrating.
Yeah, it's like charging for MFA.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop
It's
doing
like what an anti-pattern to
exactly,
security.
yeah.
And then, to your point, I think we're a little luckier when it comes to stuff like BeyondCorp, and that we can, we're small enough that we can still make those decisions now. That hopefully the technology evolves with us, and in a couple years when our security story becomes even more important, that the tools are ready for it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, companies born on the cloud have an advantage from day one because everything just lines up with the cloud as it stands architecturally. But, that's not the reality for a lot of companies. And so let's say you're a champion, you're inside of a large organization, and you're trying to convince the higher ups that this is the path to go. Aside from saying going fear driven, what's a good kind of proactive kind of positive way to present something like BeyondCorp that gets CISO or somebody excited?
Opportunity and cost savings.
he touched it as well, though. It's ease of use, right? It's the enablement. Yep. It's we're not the blocker anymore. We're helping you get there, right? It's a mutual agreement now. We're in this together. I'm not paying $400,000 for an appliance for 20 users. I'm not stuck in that paradigm anymore. This is a way for us to do our jobs together easily.
Yeah, I can't give insight to that because the conversation was like, do you think Scale Up T is a good idea? And I was like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Great, let's do it. And
Let that be a lesson for all of you evaluating Scale Up T, yes.
BeyondCorp looks good, put it in.
Yeah, there you go. So, I think that speaks to my next question, which is around kind of SaaS, so the SaaSification of security.
Let's get sassy.
All right, you're out. Security has been delivered as an appliance to date. You walk the show floor of RSA, it'll probably still be the same people trying to sell you their appliance to drop in, pay $10,000 for this thing, otherwise you're going to get hacked tomorrow. Back to back to back to back. Do you see security being able to be delivered as a SaaS, realistically, in a way that's going to pass compliance, that's going to make everybody happy?
I think security as SaaS it's important. It's the most flexible way to deliver it, and it's also the cheapest way to deliver it.
It is a service obviously. But I think delivering it to people who don't necessarily understand it or know what they need is probably where SaaS comes in.
Yeah.
That's the piece of the pie that we're missing, making it easy for them
And
to use.
if you look at the top breaches today, if you look at the Verizon breach report, I think 2017, 81% of breaches were caused by leaked or weak credentials. That's something that BeyondCorp can solve.
Yep.
I don't think, a company our size, we don't have a choice. It has to be SaaS. Like, there is
Yeah.
no option. Like, that is the option. Somebody else has to help us do this. Otherwise, it's not happening. So, yes, it will work because it has to.
Good. You guys are the perfect persona to be out there promoting.
Do you know anything like that?
I've heard of some things.
Okay.
If you'd like to learn more about ScaleFT, find anyone with a ScaleFT badge. Grab a T-shirt. I mean, I appreciate you all mentioning our company name. We try to keep it vendor neutral in the BeyondCorp context. I guess in that context, outside of the awesome things that we are building, who's doing really cool stuff in this space that's helping companies like yours?
I mean, our entire business model is based on the fact that we believe we can replace all of the equipment that you would see at the top shelf of a rack with much more flexible, much more powerful tools that can be available to every business, whether they're a mom and pop t-shirt type shop all the way through to a major financial institution. And that's basically what SaaS does. Without SaaS, you're stuck in the appliance world. You've got pieces of tin that get deprecated within a few months, and the security behind them ain't that hot.
But they have blinky lights.
That's true. I can give you blinky lights.
Yeah, and hopefully SaaS lowers the barrier to entry, so you don't have to be Google to do
Absolutely.
something like this. I mean, that's the challenge, I think, from a community perspective of promoting something like BeyondCorp is all we have to date is really to look at it through the lens of Google. But we see more companies like yours, people like you, kind of trying things out, doing more things in this space, and I think the way that we're going to get to the next level is just continue to kind of share tips and tricks, gotchas, and evolve the kind of architecture so it's not just this Google reference architecture. So in that kind of spirit, I think there's still some gaps. I think companies struggle with what do I do about access policies? Like how do I manage that? What kind of different things do I have to support? How do I make sure it's understandable? Do you see an opportunity, policies anywhere in the kind of BeyondCorp kind of architecture, reference architecture for standards or open source projects or things that we can kind of form as an ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, from what I said before, I think BeyondCorp as an architecture is very extensible. And so I think there's going to be an ecosystem that grows around it. One of the areas in particular I think that's going to do well is threat intelligence. Threat intelligence with current architectures is hard because the data that comes out of different companies is inconsistent. Correlating it across companies is next to impossible or useless. But if everyone moves to a similar kind of architecture like BeyondCorp, suddenly you're empowering all these companies to knowledge share, to share threat events, and to actually work together as an ecosystem rather than just as individual isolated islands.
How much of, this might be an ignorant question, but how much of BeyondCorp is like set in stone to some extent? Like how much of a standard is there right now? Like how much of a reference document do you have? I mean, you read the
It
white
was released in 2014 by a couple people from Google.
Yeah, I mean, you read the white paper, and
Right.
the white paper like tops,
That's it.
like topical, right? But
Yeah,
it's not like so much like.
they've released more in the past few years. But the way I do it is I say there's Google's BeyondCorp, and then there's just this BeyondCorp.
Right.
Yeah.
BeyondCorp as an idea.
As a
it makes-
idea.
Right. Like Google's BeyondCorp is not
right.
necessarily what we need to have.
Right.
We
Yeah,
need to,
it might
we need
not
to
be
adjust it
realistic.
to our companies and our flows.
Right, that's where the Basecamp kind of comes in.
I think even Google's BeyondCorp has evolved dramatically beyond the initial point. BeyondCorp, the paper was a starting point. Now it's up to us to take the ball and run with it and see what else we can build.
So I'm going to harp on Mark though real quick. I think you said what can we do as a community, like open source projects, et cetera. Like I think one of the biggest barriers to entry, and I might be jumping ahead here, is things like PKI, like the stuff that an average shop doesn't want to touch.
Right.
Like you want me to be a CA and issue certificates? Like if there was
SaaS
a way,
services do, yep.
right? But even like if I had to run my own internally, like if it wasn't necessarily SaaS,
Right.
if there was a way to do this easily, which I think you guys have outlined pretty well from Cloudflare's perspective. I think that's kind of like the tipping point for the average company.
Yeah, I mean, Let's Encrypt lowers the barrier, but
Right.
still, there's some missing pieces, and you got to operate it yourself. And the chains of trust that you want to build internally may not be something that you want to manage and be responsible for. It's just like I'm a security
Right.
engineer. I hold the keys, literally.
If we made that easy, though.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely one. I think the device management is another, just kind of the endpoint security angle. Yeah, policies like, I've talked to some folks at the Google about this. The Google,
The Googs.
The Googs.
the Goog. They wrote their own kind of language internally, and it makes perfect sense for them. But how do we take that and extract it for other people? Do we want to have 10 different policy specs floating around, or come together? So that's like discovery phase. I think my hopeful for kind of the next evolution of the community is to be kind of ecosystem driven.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of such community right now? Is there like a?
You're looking at it, man.
I know there's BeyondCorp, and I've learned there's BeyondCorp.com, which is a community
Yeah.
site. But is there like any kind of specs like coming along? Is there anybody sitting down having meetings and that kind of stuff, or is it
Not
more just like a
publicly,
session?
yeah. I think it's still coming together. I think people are still trying to figure out, what that means for kind of publicizing, or outside of their own products, their own motivations. I'm very hopeful that we can bring people together. There's enough people doing the different things. I think I've tried to assemble the powers that be at different companies and just share information. But I think it takes more events like this and just kind of communicating. Where do you see as the next phase along this path?
I was just going to say, I don't want to plug us too much, but Cloudflare is about to launch a developer portal, and the idea behind that is we're going to be documenting all of the extensions and systems that we make available publicly so that people can build more. And I think inviting partner companies to come in and put stuff in there as well makes sense.
Cool.
The more we bring people together and collaborate, the better stuff we get.
Absolutely.
Count us in. We'll be there. We're just down the street.
I'll walk over.
Nice. I think I'm ready to open up for some Q&A. I would say, if anybody has any questions, let's keep in the context of your own experiences with BeyondCorp and trying to figure out like what is everybody working on, or what blockers are you running into, or where do you see kind of the next phase of this ecosystem? Justine has the microphones.
It's an interesting problem that nobody's really solved. I think we tried to set up frameworks in the past, right? Sticks, taxi, all these things to share information, right? But there's never been a cohesive kind of mind share about how. Right, there's never been a cohesive framework about how we interpret and deliver results based on that stuff.
Because the government one is like it sucks. It's anecdotal. Like that's how you do threats and people get.
It's the government one, man. Yeah.
But the problem is the government is just as incentivized not to
Exactly.
tell you about stuff as they are to tell you about
Exactly.
stuff. But to be fair to them, when no one security company calls a threat by the same name, how do you correlate all this stuff? Every piece of malware has like 12 different names, yet it's the same thing.
I'd like
cool
to see
logos too.
Yeah, I'd even like to see more traction on like actually threat modeling as a community. Like how do we actually interpret and assess the risk to ourselves based on what we are doing as a community?
Well, that's the point. I think it's up to everybody to assess their own threat levels at their own companies. Well, yeah.
I get what he's saying. There's no translation layer
right.
between us.
But if you
right?
default to everything is
So I built my own
fucked and
model.
I'm screwed, then you're not
Yeah.
going to fix anything. But if you kind of if
my
there's
threat
some
model is
sort of-
based on my feelings.
What we
it's about the
need,
feels, man.
what we need is logos.
Logos, more logos. Maintaining private keys for your own, like let's say
Don't.
your own wallets, I guess, is the probably use case right now. So there's going to be, let's say there's more enterprise blockchain use cases. We've got more PKI floating around that's a lot more dangerous. What do we do about that? Is that kind of the question here? Yeah.
USB thumb drives.
I think the problem is a lot of those things are based on the older models of how APIs should operate.
Yeah.
So you have a long secret key and you handle that and you send it out. But what we actually need is systems where we're not disclosing secrets anymore. Instead, we're using mutual information exchanges to ensure that we've authenticated ourselves, that we have authorized our access, and that we're validated to move on.
Don't forget audit.
Yeah, that's one of the 3 core principles of BeyondCorp is, access must be authenticated, authorized, and encrypted from end to end. So if we can apply that in this world, then yeah. But yeah, don't leave your keys laying around, I think. But now we've got like non-technical people getting involved in this that probably don't have the same level of expertise. I mean, that's
No.
going to be a world of hurt.
Now
And it shouldn't be.
Now they put them
Yeah,
in.
it shouldn't be, but
Now they put them in GitHub.
yeah.
I have a question actually, maybe for you guys. It's kind of related what we're talking about. There was a company the other day that was accidentally consuming passwords from their customers and shipping them to their cloud when they were doing some other data tracking.
Accidentally.
So that's, yeah, exactly, accidentally.
Unknowingly?
Wasn't knowingly, accidental.
Unknowing. Anyone? So I married an expert?
Unknown feature, there you go. It was an unknown feature that was discovered. They cleaned up about it, and of course, they're getting hit in the news now, and they're going to eat it a little bit, but it's not really going to be that sufficient, right? Like they messed up pretty
It's not
big.
life-ending.
And yeah, it's not life-ending for them. But that's pretty like an interesting paradigm of security that like this is never taken seriously enough that like something like that doesn't end the company, right?
This
It's like
goes
that's a
back to,
weird.
this is the Equifax paradigm, right?
Yeah,
Like, they
kind
should
of.
have been destroyed,
Yeah.
right? Nope,
Yeah,
their
we don't
stock,
care
their stock
anymore.
price is back, and now
Yeah.
they're not getting investigated by the government.
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be some knobs financially that need to be turned in the risk model that
Yep.
Is that what it's going to
So
take?
big,
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
that make this a real thing,
Right.
right? And if that has to come via regulation, I'm going to be very sad because I don't want to deal with any more SOC 2, SOX, FedRAMP, HIPAA, whatever. Name
Yes.
it.
Insert compliance
Right.
here.
I don't want to deal
Yeah.
with that anymore. I think.
So like it goes back to like the point you were kind of making, whereas I view tools that are coming out now like SaaS options, and for somebody like me that where security is still a new space for me, and like it's an overwhelming amount of information, but it takes like my good intention to like help solve this stuff, but the company itself largely ignores, as far as a threat, like. So like it's good that all this stuff is getting cheaper, and maybe over time that's a sufficient way to address this. But it's kind of like I wish there was a way to like start the company and be like by default you have to do these things, otherwise you're not a company. Like it just doesn't exist.
You need to establish a risk-based security model from the get-go and
Secure,
understand.
Secure by design.
But,
Right,
but,
and
who, but who does
exactly.
that, right? Like,
Well, I mean,
Well, you need
as,
the visibility.
as
Full
we move
circle.
forward, I mean, I know there are companies that have done it before. I may or may not have worked at one of them. From the get-go, like 2013, we were like, we're doing risk-based security, we're doing BeyondCorp, like these things will happen. And we tied our financials back to our security risk, and we understood the impacts,
Right.
right? Like if that messaging can be continuous throughout the industry.
so do you like is the hope then that like eventually those companies evolutionarily work like they win because like they're able, like you were saying, point to be
Absolutely.
like this is a strength of ours, and like these companies can't even catch
But
up.
here's
if
my
it's
hope
possible.
that their cyber insurance costs are so high that they're forced to enact a program to actually recognize these things.
Yeah, because you would never have a company start without accounting, right? Like that wouldn't happen. You wouldn't start a company and not have accounting,
Sure.
right? Like
Start a
somebody
Ponzi
is
scheme without
somebody is
accounting.
doing
It's
the
totally
books.
fine.
Yeah, Madoff is okay.
Compliance is not security.
I didn't want to talk about it. Wait, what? Hold on.
Compliance is a guideline, and if you use it well,
Yeah, right?
it's a tool set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does not give you good security. And what we really need is a measure that shows the true security posture of companies,
Security.
rather than a checkbox that anyone can bluff their way through.
Security should drive the compliance framework, and if you're
Yeah.
doing it right, compliance shouldn't be an issue. They use security controls to drive that compliance, right? So by the time they release this framework, it's 5 years old.
But like even if you take a look at even some of the more recent ones, like take SSA 18 SOC 2.
Sure.
Like Cloudflare's, we're going through it at the moment. I took another $1 billion company through it many years ago. Most companies only do up to 2 of the 5 principles of SOC 2.
The bare minimum.
The principles are security, confidentiality,
Security check.
privacy, and availability. Hey. Do I get a beer?
Is there a triad in here, Mark?
But most companies only pick 2 of those to go through. Now we're doing 4. The last one is So the last one is
There's always a 5th dentist. That's why.
transactional processing and transactional integrity. We don't do that, so it's not valid. But the fact that you can pick and choose the scope of your compliance frameworks, ISO 27001, you can do the same thing. You can make part of your network ISO 27001 and compliant,
Let's de-scope
and
it.
then say to everybody that you're ISO compliant.
Yep.
Like, that's not good. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think we need to blame the external auditors for this one too.
Yeah.
Like the big 4 really aren't on top of this. They're like, yeah, that looks good.
Well, they've got other problems, obviously, to
Is
deal
GitHub
with.
made
Yeah.
by Oracle? That's a cool database. Like, right.
But what I will say is, having done this and been doing it the second time, I'm a glutton for punishment, but B, I also recognize that the BeyondCorp architecture is way easier to audit for
It
that
is.
kind of compliance. And that gives you the bandwidth to actually start using it as a tool to drive good security rather than just a checkbox to drive sales.
Absolutely.
Right. Granular access controls, eliminating static credentials, all those things are things you can check off. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, again, being a small place, what I've really liked is like we need to check the boxes. We have no choice. We're getting asked from big customers. You check boxes like, oh God, we're trying like the hardest we can, and this is something that feels good. Like I feel like when we're doing this BeyondCorp stuff and interacting with Scale FT, it feels like the right way to do things anyways. And then we get the perks of like, oh, here's all these things now. You can you have least access control, you have granular access, you have audit logs, like you have all this stuff before you didn't, and you're actually making the developer's life easier than it was.
Well, too many layers, right?
too-
What you
yeah.
don't want to do is have different kind of rules for getting into the network versus getting into the cluster versus getting into the container.
Right.
So, I guess what you're asking, is there a way to unify that or centralize it in kind of a consistent
Or
way?
get rid of it, or not frustrate your
Right.
developers.
Not even worry about it.
Yeah.
I honestly don't have any clever answers for you because it's a problem that we're thinking about right now ourselves. Containers are not perfect security. You can break out of containers. Most of the tools you find out there, like, for example, use Nessus against something like Kubernetes and Docker, and you're not going to get very far.
Right.
So there needs to be more tools and more stuff built out. I think, I believe BeyondCorp does offer some opportunities there, but I don't think anyone has built anything yet.
Right. Ideologically, it exists. I look at you and I almost said build it. But like,
If anyone can, it's Eric.
like you're literally you're describing a fairly complex role-based access control system that just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Hey!
I think you've got the bandwidth now, right?
Yeah. Congrats, by the way.
Congrats.
Well, is there any argument? I guess this is more difficult for somebody like Kubernetes who has to serve all kinds of different use cases and customers who won't accept the answer of like, but for like trust the developer or trust the developments and then audit, right? Like alarms, audit, and trust that they're doing good natured things. Is that an option or is that completely off the table?
It rolls back to like a basic versioning of like a threat model for me. Like just understand what your
Back to threat
application's doing
modeling.
it, how it's doing it, right? And that should build out those constructs for you.
I want to leave some time for everybody to continue to mingle and share your own stories. If you want to find out more about Scale FT, find any one of us. BeyondCorp as a community, we're building this. We want to get more people involved. Thank you all for coming out. We have BeyondCorp.com. We have meetups here in San Francisco, Austin, Boston, New York, and Seattle. We're looking to get some more. And thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it. And thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.